In this segment, we're going to talk about one of the priorities that's essential in the Montessori classroom, and that is one of the ways in which the lead educator in the classroom needs to be supported. Now, the reason that I phrase it that way is I believe that that person, that adult, does set the tone for a classroom. Typically, in a Montessori classroom, the person who has ideally complete Montessori training for the ages of the children that are in his or her class. That person I call the lead educator, the lead mentor, and that person is in charge of not only presenting the materials, having a knowledge of all the materials in the classroom, but organizing the day, setting the tone, designing and organizing the environment. And ideally, that person has another adult, an assistant that works with them. Now, this can look lots of different ways. Maybe in a very large class, you would have two co-leads and even another assistant. But what I'm going to talk about in this segment is the importance of there being a support system in the way of another adult that supports that lead educator. And there's a lot of reasons why this is important. One of the most important being that when someone is giving a lesson presentation to a child, it's very nice, especially if that person has not been trained for a very long time, if they themselves are still in the process of completely mastering the presentations and the Montessori materials, it's really nice for them to be able to relax a little bit in that presentation and put most, if not all, of their attention on that child. That said, there's also the temptation, if you're doing that, to spend more time than you should. I do believe, and this is a way that my thoughts have evolved, that ideally lesson presentations are on the shorter rather than the longer side, and that you leave the child with that material working on their own as you then move on to work with another child, so that the material is doing a lot of the instruction, not just the classroom lead. However, if that child needs your help, if they need to have a representation with full attention so you can see where they ran into problems after the first time the material was presented, all of these are different examples of why when a presentation is happening, someone else needs to be attending to the other needs in the classroom. And this would be, in the way that I'm going to describe things, typically the classroom assistant. So even though I'm going to speak of one lead and one assistant, know that this can actually play out in a lot of different ways. It could be more than one lead, it could be more than one assistant. If we're talking a homeschool environment or a homeschool co-op, it may be a group of parents who kind of trade off who's taking which roles. So when I talk about the classroom assistant, I'm talking about the person who, at least at the time that they're functioning in that role, is primarily responsible for things other than presenting the materials to the children. Doesn't mean that they won't have some of that ability, especially with materials that are used frequently and repeatedly in the classroom, so that the classroom lead will have a chance to kind of absorb some of the correct usage of those materials just from his or her other roles. But that's primarily what I'm going to address in this segment, is the person who is dealing with the other aspects of the classroom. So if you want to make sure that a classroom lead is well supported with an assistant, there's several things that need to happen. First, you need to make sure that you have budgeted or made the arrangements so that this person is there. Ideally, that person is there for the entire time of the students are there, and maybe even additional time. If your classroom assistant is able to be paid for some time before and after the time that the children are there, that is a tremendous help and a tremendous support to that classroom lead, so that they are able to do some of the preparation of the environment, some of the other things that take some of that load off of the lead educator. But at the very minimum, that classroom assistant needs to be there for what I've referred to as the great work period, that time when ideally a lot of concentrated work is taking place, and perhaps, especially in a newer Montessori environment, that concentrated work may need to be protected, as some children are not able to focus fully yet and might pull off track some of their classmates or interfere with the concentration that's already established if there's not an adult there to kind of safeguard that a little bit. So during that time, it's absolutely essential, but I would certainly say if there's any way that the assistant can be present for the entire time the children are, that would be the priority. Now, once you have made that a priority to make sure that within the Montessori environment that role of an assistant is being fulfilled, how do we make sure that that person is going to give the support that the lead educator needs? Obviously, training. How do we help that person to understand what their role is? How do we help those people understand their roles in supporting the children and supporting the lead educator? Now, I don't mean to be negative in what I'm going to say now, but I feel like as I give suggestions, as I hopefully add to the conversation of how we support Montessori educators, I feel like it's important to talk about some potential pitfalls in seeking out training for assistants. Some training programs that I have become familiar with that have some very good, high quality training for a full Montessori credential for a lead educator also offer assistant training and don't do quite as good a job. So don't assume that because a training center, you've had experience with teachers who have been trained there, educators who've been trained there, and they're doing a good job leading a classroom. Don't assume that the assistance training is something that would serve you. Now, that being said, don't assume that it won't either, but do a little bit of investigating, and here's why. I have found that a lot of assistance trainings, from what I've been able to observe, are kind of a piece taken out of the regular Montessori classroom lead training, and that is not really the most important skills and content knowledge for a classroom assistant. And the reason I'm saying most important is that typically, if you are providing training for classroom assistants, we're not talking about sending them to weeks or months of training. We're talking about sending them to days of training. So if that is the case, we need to figure out what is it that those days most need to contain. And I'm going to suggest that it's not an overview of the materials, although there certainly can be some time that's worthwhile spent in that way, but especially with the information that we have on the internet, the information I've provided in this online television show alone would provide, without taking classroom training time, enough of an overview for most assistants. Give them a little guidance as to which episodes to watch outside of that time, and I think that is pretty low load homework that could be included with something that you're doing in a live setting. Now, within that assistance training, I'm going to suggest that the most important thing that they are doing is preserving the respectful environment. That's what they need to learn to do first and foremost. So one of the things that's involved with that is, of course, clearly communicating with that lead educator, making sure that there is time taken for the two of them to collaborate, whether it is some lunchtime that they're not taking with the children. Many Montessori educators eat with their Montessori classes, and I think that's a great thing. I think typically that's a wonderful way to do it. But perhaps there are some creative ways that lunch could become a time for some regular collaboration. Maybe if you do have parents who are willing to learn the grace and courtesy that's necessary during lunch in a Montessori classroom, maybe some of your parent volunteers could be the adults supervising lunchtime once a week or something like that, so that those two educators, the lead and the assistant, could have some formal scheduled collaboration time to make sure that anything that they need to work out on day-to-day business, week-to-week business, that they have a chance to do that. That's one way to make sure that that is happening. What I'm going to suggest is another essential piece is giving a focus of classroom leadership and management for additional training that's given to classroom assistants. Their main job is going to be to keep that respectful tone going on in the classroom while the lead educator is giving presentations. Of course, I'm not saying the lead educator isn't going to be doing that as well, and I'm not saying that there wouldn't be an appropriate switching out of roles, especially, and ideally this would be the case in many situations, especially if that assistant aspires to lead a classroom of his or her own in the future. Then of course some trading off would be a wonderful way to let them begin to get that experience while someone who had the greater training, had the sense of how to hold that respectful space within the classroom, had that primary responsibility. But until that is the case, making sure that those people know how they can keep that part of the classroom functioning is essential. How do they make notes for the lead educator? How do they take the observations that they are making and make sure that the lead educator gets those? If they are doing the bulk of the checking of work in the classroom, how do they make sure that there's some kind of a record that they're able to pass on about the children who are doing work more accurately and less accurately? A list of children who perhaps need a representation on some materials that the lead educator wouldn't know about if the assistant wasn't doing that. And most importantly, there needs to be a cohesive, collaborative way that both of those educators deal with incidents of disrespect in the classroom. That assistant needs to be trained to assess all the things that are going on in the classroom and choose which is the place to intervene first, which is the place to intervene second. How can that person make a little bit of an impact here and then make an impact here if both of these situations are high priority at that time? That is the nature of the training that assistants need to have. Other things are certainly fine to add in, but if you're going to give a weekend training or a week's training to these individuals, that's where the bulk of the time needs to be. And I would also suggest that any training like that needs to include the lead educators that are part of that system. So especially as is common if a school is doing a training for assistants within their school, or a group of schools are doing that, there needs to be some aspect of that training that involves the lead educators to make sure that their needs are met, especially the experienced lead educators who have been involved with the class for a long period of time. Now, obviously, if I'm providing this information in an online television show, I believe that I have some experience to share. But I'm going to be the first one to tell you that I don't have all the answers. And I'm also going to be the first one to tell you that what I thought were the answers a year ago or 2 years ago, I no longer do. Because as I learn more, as I read more of Dr. Montessori's work, as I work with more gifted classroom professionals, I learn more. I find out there are different ways of doing things. And of course, I find out that the answer in one Montessori classroom is not the answer in another classroom. What I'm going to suggest to you is that I believe what I have to offer a lot of the time is that I have learned to ask the right questions. And that's what I'm going to suggest to you is most important in this training, in the way that you structure training for Montessori classroom assistants. Make sure you're asking the right questions about what these individuals are going to be doing and so what they need to be doing. And as someone who is setting up a training, you can answer those questions for yourself, but make sure you don't stop there. Make sure you bring in the experienced classroom leads that are going to be working with these assistants and find out their perspective. Get their list. If you've got top 3 skills you want these people to be able to do before they ever step into the classroom, how can we set that up for you? What do we need them to be doing? How do you want them communicating with you? How do you want them collaborating with you? What things do you want them doing while you're doing other things? And the last piece that I'm going to say is that in addition to making sure that you have involved your classroom leads with this training, turn it around the other way as well. Train those classroom leads to work with those classroom assistants well. Train them to set out their expectations written down on paper. Train them to provide schedules, daily schedules, weekly schedules, so that these individuals know what to expect. And finally, have them put down on paper what's most important to them. So right from the beginning, this kind of collaboration can start with success. As the next one of our pitfalls that we're going to discuss, I'd like to suggest that a failure to do strategic planning is one of the greatest problems that Montessori educators face. Now, I would say the larger your Montessori program, the larger problem that this is potentially. Even if you are doing a Montessori home, you're just having your children within your home, being as independent as they can, supporting the practical life activities that the home provides for them naturally, it can still be a problem if you're not planning strategically. If you're doing some remodeling, if you've got a family budget that you're looking at, even if you are interacting with relatives who buy gifts for your child, if you've thought things out carefully and planned strategically for what you want your prepared environment to look like, whether or not that's your child's room in your home or a school with 14 classrooms, if you fail to plan strategically, the likelihood that you're going to be spending more time problem solving than being able to just offer Montessori education to the children is very, very high. So let's talk about what strategic planning involves. It involves the environment, the physical environment. It involves the human resources of the environment, not only hiring and training staff, but just how you work together as a community, whether that's a community of parents and maybe grandparents and children, or a large school community with hundreds of parents and hundreds of children, etc. So you need to look at least 3 different aspects for strategic planning. One is your physical space, one is your human resources, and the last one is the flow of time. Now, I'm actually going to start with that one because I think this is a place where sitting with a piece of paper, laying out what's already going on, laying out what should be going on if you are opening a new Montessori environment, whether it be starting to move your home into a more Montessori way of doing things or opening a brand new school. If you sit down with a piece of paper or a computer screen and you set out these different frameworks, I think a huge amount of problems can be avoided, and it will allow you to think things through in a strategic way. What's your day going to look like? What's your week going to look like? What's your month going to look like? Probably the least important. And what's your year going to look like? If you have set those things out clearly, you're going to be more relaxed. The human resources that you interact with are going to be more relaxed, and the children are going to feel more secure, especially the younger children, but even children up through an adolescent program. I believe a great deal of security comes for a lot of our children when they know what to expect. You'll see this in a lot of education literature, that when you post a child's schedule and help them know what's happening, that anxiety goes down for children who tend to have that situation. But more importantly, in the strategic planning mode that I'm talking about, you are going to feel more like you're in control of what's happening in a good way, not in a over controlling way. So you look at your day, you look at what happens at the beginning of the day, what happens in the middle of the day, what happens at the end of the day. This is the only way, in my experience, that you're going to have what many Montessorians, including myself, feel is essential, which is a large, uninterrupted work period for the children in a Montessori environment, so that they're interacting with the materials in a way that they are managing. They have a chance to go through a phenomenon that is sometimes called false fatigue, where they seem to be restless or tired and not making that good of choices. But what's really happening is that they are going to a deeper level of decision making and a deeper level of self-management, where they are able to then find their own inner motivation and choose their work from that place. The only way that's going to happen is if you lay out that great work period in your daily schedule. Your weekly schedule will allow you to possibly fit in things that perhaps you're even required to fit in, depending on what your experience is or your constraints are as a public Montessori school. If you have decided that you are going to have what are sometimes referred to as specials, this will allow you to look at how can we fit the music instructor coming in and offering some things and still protect our great work period, still give as much or total child choice in the choice of activities that these children are given. This is the kind of thing you can do when you lay out your week. And then laying out the month is important, especially if you've got maybe monthly parent work days or something like that you're going to be organizing. So those are all laid out well ahead of time and you're not trying to cram too much in. But also you need to lay out your year. And the bigger your program, the more adults involved with your program, the more important this is. Don't overwhelm your parents. Don't overwhelm your staff with trying to cram too much into a year. Only if you're looking at all of the fundraising activities and all of the parent work days and everything else that you're putting in an academic year can you have a clear perspective on that. Now, if it hasn't been obvious by now, especially if you've been doing some of this strategic planning, I think it will be, this plan is then going to interact with your space. Especially if you are a large program, you're going to have to look at how your daily schedule and the daily schedule of each individual classroom and each level of classroom is going to interact with your physical space. If you have separate spaces for meals, many Montessori schools eat lunch in their own classroom, which I think is great. But if you do have a lunch space, or if you have a place where meals are provided to children who perhaps can't afford so easily to bring their own food to school, you've got to look at how that interacts. The daily and weekly schedules of all of your classes, how they interact with your space, your playground space. If you're going to manage some of this space, you need to look at how you're going to do that. Is there an online calendar? Is it set up where if somebody schedules something, they don't accidentally unschedule someone else's activities? These are the things that strategic planning brings to you. And of course, the core of this is all those wonderful adults that are helping you in your preparation and in the way that you serve the children. Only if you plan things out strategically can you make sure you're not overburdening them. Only then can you look at how you make the best use of those resources. What can you delegate to parents, or what can you ask parents to step up and do? If you have parents that are not able to pay full tuition in a paid program, how are you going to organize them contributing fully? Are they going to be doing things in the classroom? Is one of them going to come in and be your staff to do some of the deep floor cleaning and things in your school? Only if you have done your strategic planning can you make the best use of all these resources. And again, even if this is a homeschool situation that you're looking at, how do you get grandma's generosity to help you set your home up in the way that you'd like? How do you realize that you've got to honor her wisdom and her desire to make things fun when you ask her to give gifts that are within your vision of Montessori education? This is the value of strategic planning. And the reason I put it in a pitfall is it is one of the things I see people fail to do over and over and over again. And I did start out with the day and the week and the year and doing it on paper or on a computer screen for a reason. One of the reasons I found that people fall into this pitfall and all the bad things that come after it is because they're not able to organize all these things in their mind. If you're not, that's fine. You have online mind maps, you have just paper and pencil where you can lay it out in front of you if you're willing to take the time to do that. In some of the resources that I have provided, I do give suggestions for strategic planning. In addition to those 3 areas that I talked about, you need to be looking at things like how your staff and your class size relate. If you've got parents who are staying with you for 3 years with their children from age 3 to 5, you're going to be wanting to open an elementary classroom. How are you going to do that? How do you get enough students? How do you see which students are likely to stay? That kind of strategic planning also can be done on paper. It's one of the things that I put into the introductory manual with the program that I've referred to earlier in this segment. So if you want to succeed, if you want to do more Montessori education and spend less time putting out fires, do your strategic planning. The value is just immeasurable. In this segment about phonics, one of the things that I want to make sure that people understand is that everything that I recommend in phonics comes from a lot of different experience and review of different things, as well as success that I've had. And I have done a lot of thinking about something that I heard someone that I admire greatly say in one of her talks at the American Montessori Society. Joanne Deek mentioned that it is easier for children to hear and distinguish the long vowel sounds, otherwise known as the names of the letters A, E, I, O, U, possibly U as a second long sound for the letter U, that it's easier for them to distinguish those sounds and to hear them than it is the short vowel sounds, A, E, I, Ah. I believe that she's right. I also believe that a conclusion that she drew from that it's better to start with those long vowel sounds, is incorrect. And the reason that I say this is as I have watched children move through the sequence of learning to read, I've noticed where the potential pitfalls are. I've noticed where they run into difficulties and where it's just kind of a smooth building. Yes, okay, I've learned this vowel sound, or consonants. I learned this one, and I learned this one, and I learned this one, and it's a pretty steady progression. That has been my experience for things like just learning the consonant sounds. I've also noticed that once a child has mastered one set of vowel sounds and works with those vowel sounds and the consonant sounds and the skill that connects them, so they know the C says K, they've learned A makes the sound A, and they've learned that a T says T. That's content. This little squiggle, okay, this little squiggle says K. This little squiggle not sure which way it would be, says ah, and this little squiggle says ta. So that's content that the child has gotten. Now the child must take that content and then apply a skill to it. They must learn to say each one of those sounds as they see the appropriate symbols, and then they must blend them smoothly together. In fact, I found that typically if they can blend the vowel sound and that final consonant sound in a three-letter word, at, they can blend those together smoothly and then kind of tack on that front sound, they're home free. So it's learning how to run those letters together smoother, quicker, or some of the cues that you can give them when you hear k, at. When they learn to blend those together, then they are starting to read words. They're at the level of a word reader or a beginning pink reader in my experience. And the reason that I say this is because I found that is a very complex accomplishment. Learning all those sounds, learning how to blend them together in a way that makes a word so that when they see nothing but those three squiggles next to each other, the child is able to get to cat. Cat. Oh, that's the animal. That's the cat. For the child to get to that place takes a lot. And to keep the content set fairly small, so you are doing just those three-letter words, so you're not having to deal with any vowels that make the long vowel sounds. You don't have to have a final silent E to make bake, to make the A say A and bake. You don't have to have a second vowel, the second E to make the E in feet, have the E sound rather than the S sound. Just having that small content set and then learning that skill is, in my experience, the best way to start. So I gave a lot of thought to this idea. So if it is easier for them to distinguish those long vowel sounds, why is it better to introduce them second? Well, I believe that the reason it is that once the children have made sort of that great work of wrapping their little minds around this idea of sounding words out, and then they've gotten practice with the phonetic readers that we have, with the Montessori materials we have, a child can get a lot of practice with just a set of mostly short vowel words and a few high frequency words that maybe have a little bit of extra help from someone to decode them. I call them the keywords. If they get through that, then the next step is really, it's a big step, but it's not huge. So that long vowel sound coming second, it should be an easier sound, because now these vowels, A, E, I, O, U, they don't just make one sound, now they make two or more than that. So that second sound, now that that new difficulty has come in, that when I see bake, I don't know if it's back or bake, because I know that that A has two different sounds. I want that second sound to be an easy one. I want one that the child can get to quickly. That's the reason I believe, even though it's easier to distinguish those long vowel sounds, it's still better to start with the short vowel sounds.